Very few comic book characters are completely invulnerable. You'll often hear people saying things like, Superman can't be beaten by anything other than Kryptonite, but that's utter nonsense. The Man of Steel is vulnerable to magic, telepathy, and can be defeated, or even outright killed, by a good old-fashioned beatdown if the character dishing it out is strong enough. The thing is, they're all acceptable weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Brute force, mind attacks, magical powers, and a very specific form of radiation make sense as things that could harm you, but not all weaknesses in comics are quite so tenable. Some characters, many of whom are incredibly powerful and appear as though it would take something wielding magnificent power to defeat them, can be beaten by the simplest, stupidest, and most mundane of objects, materials, and concepts. Josh, for instance, is deathly allergic to pretentious ale. The more you know. Well, anyway, in many cases, you just have to sit back and marvel at just how crazy some of these weaknesses were. So, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture Comics, and here are 10 utterly ridiculous comic book weaknesses. Number 10. Dark Elves. Iron. The Dark Elves are a Marvel comic book race who boast powerful beings like Malekith and Curse amongst their ranks, characters with whom you may be most familiar from Thor the Dark World, and if you are then, well, you have my sympathies. By default, they are supremely strong and durable, but the named characters, like the ones just mentioned, have additional powers like mystical tracking abilities and the ability to wield dark fairy magic, which makes them serious threats to characters as powerful as Thor. And yet, if you sprinkled some iron powder on them, they'd be reduced to whimpering cowards. That's right, the Dark Elves are weak to iron. Touch them with anything made of the metal and they are rendered powerless. Makes them seem a lot less formidable, doesn't it? Especially if your name's Tony Stark. Number 9. The color yellow. The Green Lanterns. The Green Lanterns are a 7,200 strong intergalactic army of law enforcers, each of whom wield a powerful willpower-fueled ring that enables them to fly, grants them insane levels of durability, and gives them the ability to create solid energy constructs of any items they can imagine, like a jet, a mech, or a reality where I'm appreciated by all my colleagues for the content powerhouse that I am. Trust me, I am. Really. They can survive in the harsh environments of space, take shots from beings more powerful than the likes of Superman, and contain suns and black holes with their powers. But, for a while, the color yellow rendered them utterly useless. It doesn't apply these days, but there was a time when all it took to breach a Green Lantern's shield was being yellow, a weakness exploited by the likes of Batman and Robin, who went to the trouble of painting themselves and the room around them yellow in order to defeat a lantern in the pages of All-Star Batman and Robin. God forbid you went at them with a HB pencil, or a wasp on a string. Number 8. Wood? Alan Scott. Perhaps even worse than the yellow weakness, a weakness specific to one Green Lantern, the magical Starheart-wielding Alan Scott, was wood. Scott's unique ring was essentially the same as every other Green Lantern in terms of its functions, but it was powered by magic rather than advanced alien technology. He learned very quickly in his heroic exploits that he was practically invulnerable whilst wearing it. Its automatic force field protecting him from physical attacks quite casually, unless the thing attacking him was made of wood. Fire an automatic machine gun at Scott all day. He'll stand there and take it. Hit him over the head with a rolling pin and he'll be out for the damn count, which, to be fair, is something anyone susceptible to culinary accidents will be able to relate to. Number 7. Letting go of MJOLNIR for more than a minute. Thor. Although this weakness is now long consigned to Marvel history, the fact is that the classic version of Thor would lose his powers if he went without touching his Warhammer MJOLNIR for more than 60 seconds. Moreover, this was when Thor's alter ego was that of Donald Blake, and MJOLNIR would disguise itself as a walking stick in order to avoid arousing suspicion. Unfortunately for Thor, one of his main methods of attack was to throw MJOLNIR at his opponents, often over long distances, so this depowering happened a lot more than you might imagine. Even more unfortunate was the fact that, if anyone else worthy was to grab MJOLNIR whilst Thor wasn't holding it, they would acquire its power and Thor would lose his. Very awkward, but hey, at least it gave us better a bill. Number 6. Having her hands tied by a man. Wonder Woman. Although the specifics of this weakness are fuzzy, as a number of writers have portrayed it differently over the years, and in some instances, simply tying Wonder Woman up has caused her to lose her powers. The general rule back on the old days was that Wonder Woman loses her powers when her bracelets are tied together. The weird thing is, however, that this only applies when the tying is done by a man. Bearing that in mind, if a male opponent subdued or overpowered Wonder Woman for long enough to chain her bracelets together, she would be rendered powerless and had to rely on her mind and wit to escape the situation. In some instances, this weakness has been even vaguer, with any method of tying her up working in depowering her, regardless of the gender of the assailant. Fortunately, this didn't carry over into the modern age of comics, with the character of today having no specific vulnerability. Number 5. Tiny amounts of fire. Venom. Venom is a pretty damn terrifying anti-hero, with his Spider-Man dwarfing strength and speed and his sharp teeth, but he's famously weakened by heat/fire and loud noises and sonic vibrations, and that's fair enough. If that's what the alien symbiote doesn't like, then hey, go with it. But the fact it takes only the tiniest amount of fire being waved around in his proximity is pretty damn ridiculous. In fact, Spider-Man has had him beaten with a lighter and matches on a couple of occasions, and even chased him off wielding a literal flaming copy of the Daily Bugle like he was an unwanted pest. Exposed to such small flames, the symbiote has been known to jump right off its host, and the implications of this are pretty ridiculous when you think about it. Hot days, fireworks, open coal fireplaces, and barbecues are big no-nos for this supposedly formidable foe. And now that's got me all sad. I mean, poor Venom and Eddie. What do they get to do for fun in the summer? Someone get them an ice cream, please. Number 4. Any raw, unprocessed natural material. Power Girl. In her own words, Power Girl is weak to any raw, unprocessed natural material, which is basically another way of saying that trees, rocks, soil, ores, and anything else that's produced by the earth can actually harm her. And you have to agree that's actually a pretty horrendous deal. Just being on Earth should be detrimental to her, let alone having to duke it out with superpowered bad guys in that very environment. One would assume that this has changed with the 2 successive reboots DC have enacted since 2011. Otherwise, Power Girl is skating on thin ice whenever she suits up for danger. I mean, come on, can you imagine that hanging over you? Like, you're as strong as Supergirl, you've got your boob window ready to go, and yet in the back of your mind, you're always going to have the fear of being conked out by some rogue minerals, or a stick, or a large amount of soil. That just can't be fun, but oh well, she's now stuck in a weird dimensional rift with Tanya Spears as of DC Rebirth, which has gotta be even worse, considering Christopher Priest's Deathstroke hasn't actually addressed the fallout of them being stuck, and that issue was 2 years ago. Yikes. Number 3, making him feel bad about himself. Gladiator. Gladiator is undoubtedly one of Marvel's most powerful heroes. He possesses planet-shattering strength, faster-than-light speed, supernova-withstanding levels of durability, some psionic abilities, heat vision, and frost breath. He's basically what Superman wants to be when he grows up. However, he has a somewhat inconvenient weakness. In addition to being weak to certain forms of radiation, which is somewhat more acceptable, his power fluctuates based on his levels of confidence. This is particularly inconvenient given that Gladiator lacks confidence, so he has been undone in battle by people making him down himself, putting him down, or hurting his feelings. So he's basically me with blue skin and a mohawk. Nice? Anyway, an example comes in the form of Rocket Raccoon. The heroic critter pointed a gun at Gladiator and told him it was capable of badly hurting him without any proof. Because Gladiator believed him, doubting his own ability to withstand the gun's power in spite of what he had withstood previously, he was essentially defeated by the robotic critter without a shot being fired. Oh. Number 2, saying his own name. Captain Marvel Jr. Captain Marvel Jr., the young sidekick of Captain Marvel and genuine real-life inspiration behind Elvis Presley's iconic look, is actually a young lad called Freddie Freeman. Like Captain Marvel, Freeman has to say his name, or Shazam depending on the era, in order to transform into his superhero alter ego. However, the same also applies in reverse. If he was to say it whilst in his superpowered form, he would revert to simply being young Freddy. As a result, all it takes to leave him completely vulnerable in battle is tricking him into saying his own name, which has proved a lot easier than you might imagine. He can quickly go from a flying, speeding brick with lightning powers to being a child in an instant, and that's a pretty big risk to bear in mind the next time he's suiting up to confront his next villain. And number 1, saying his own name backwards, Mr. MXYZPTLK. Mr. MXYZPTLK is flat out one of the most powerful beings in comic books. A 5th-dimensional imp, Mixie comes from a place where the laws of our universe's physics simply don't apply, and, as such, what people normally view as impossible is normal and very much possible to him. As such, when he gets to the mainstream DC universe, he is practically God. A very mischievous and fun-loving God, don't get me wrong, but he just so happens to like tormenting Superman of all people. If Mixie wanted to turn Superman into a cockroach or make him cease to exist completely, he could actually do so. The Man of Steel really poses no threat to him, but in order to give himself a challenge, he chose to give himself a weakness. If he says his own name backwards, he gets banished back to where he came from. Unfortunately, he happens to be a massive gullible idiot, and, invariably, Superman gets him to say it all the goddamn time. You hate to see it. And that was our list on the craziest and worst comic book releases ever created. Think we missed any? Shout out your suggestions in the comments below, and once you've done that, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. As always, you can find more lists like this over at whatculture.com/comics, more of me on Twitter @YouandRuinsThings, and more delicious stories like this within the walls of your local comic book store.